Vineyard Boise. We're glad you're joining us this morning. My name is Mitchell. I'm the media director here, and I just want to share with you all the ways that you can engage in the service this morning. So we have 3 ways that you can engage. First is Facebook. Just head over to our Facebook page and you can watch live and interact with other members of the church as well as some of the leadership team. You can also start a watch party and share the service with all your friends and family. Make sure you're following the page so you'll get notified when we go live. Second is YouTube. YouTube makes it super easy to pull up the service on Apple TVs, Roku's, and smart TVs. Just open up the YouTube app and go to our channel and you're all set. This may be an easier option if you're wanting to watch just as a family or just not wanting to see the comments. Again, subscribe to our channel and you'll get notified when we go live. Third is our newest option at vineyardboise.org/live. We've added a lot of new features to the live platform on our website to help you better engage. In addition to a great chat feature for the congregation, you can also ask for prayer from our leadership team and then pray with someone in the private chat window. There's also a built-in Bible and easy access to our devotions and some other great tools. Just go to vineyardboise.org/live or click the Watch Live button on the website or the app. If you're new to Vineyard Boise, have questions, or want to connect with our leadership, we'd love to hear from you. Just fill out our online Connect card at vineyardboise.org/connect, and we'd love to get in touch with you. You can also ask for prayer by emailing prayer@vineyardboise.org. Enjoy the service.
We're pausing. We've been studying the book of Mark, and we're going to hit pause on that. We'll circle back to it in 2021. For now, we're beginning a series on Advent. So this is a season of preparation. It's preparation and it's celebrating the story of Christmas, but it's really preparing our hearts as we anticipate and lean into the story that is our shaping story. Christmas and Easter, these are the stories that shape us as followers of Jesus, as a spiritual family on mission with God. And so we're going to spend some time preparing for that. And this time we're leaning into what we call the gift of risk. That's the theme that we're going to be exploring together, the gift of risk. And so a couple of ways that you can connect with that. One, I'm going to give you 2 links. I'd encourage you to write these down. Again, these are just our website. And then the first one is /Advent. So vineyardboise.org/Advent. If you go there, you can download one of these. And this is it's just a brief little journal that allows you to engage with this on a weekly basis. Every week there's going to be a theme. So this is in conjunction with Vineyard USA, with Vineyard Resources. We're part of a network of churches throughout the globe, and this is in concert with the U.S. churches. And so these are just a set of prompts to guide you through Advent using the lenses of risk, faith-filled risk, actually. And then along with that, if you're not already following our devotions, Pastor Mike and actually Rihanna Freeman together, they write devotions for us 5 days every week. And so those devotions are going to match that theme of risk. They're just going to flesh it out a little bit more using characters from Hebrews 11. And so we're going to be looking at all those stories. So you can find the devotions there at the second link, or you can sign up to have them delivered to you. And there on that first link, you'll also find a little video from Pastor Mike explaining a little bit more about Advent and what we're doing. So if you're here on campus this morning, we have hard copies of this printed out. They're in the office lobby, so you can grab one of those as well if you'd rather have us pay for the ink. And if you're dropping off your Whittier box, you can pick one up then as well. So that said, each one of these mornings of Advent, we're going to start with a brief Christmas drama as performed by some of the young people in our church, a couple of young families each week. And so for today, we're examining this theme of risk, and we're going to look at the story of the Magi, the wise men, as some people like to call them, and look at it through the lenses of risk. What part of their story, as they engage the Christmas story, called them to faith-filled risk? And so this morning, you're going to hear from James Palm is going to be our narrator. And then we have 4 Magi. We've got Graham Palm and Harrison Mace, Henry Mace, and Wesley Mace. These are brothers and cousins. And we have literally a star this morning. Literally, we have a star, and that is going to be Sophia Guizzo. So would you welcome the risk of the Magi?
The Magi, ancient astronomers from the far eastern reaches of Persia, what we now know today as Iran. They did not arrive on that first Christmas morning bearing gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They hadn't even left home yet. But on the night the one who would be king of the Jews was born, they saw something. As they scanned the night sky, studying the movements of the stars and the planets, suddenly they saw it, a celestial event, a convergence of heavenly bodies, unlike anything they had ever witnessed before. They each took turns studying it, and they read from their ancient scrolls containing wisdom and prophecies handed down for generations, stretching back to the time of Queen Esther and the vice-regent Mordecai. They looked and they read, they observed and they pondered. This is not just a distant star, it's pointing towards the west. See how it moves. One of them, turning away from the stars towards his fellow scholars, said, "We must follow this star and see where it takes us. The ancient prophecies point towards the prince who will come, the prince of Judah who will reign. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until it comes to whom it belongs, and the obedience of the nations is his," said the third scholar reading the scroll. "Surely we must go," the two said together. "Are you out of your minds?" said the fourth scholar. "We're scholars, astronomers, not world-traveling adventurers. It's 1,500 miles from here to the land of Judah, if that's where the star is leading us. 1,500 miles across the desert, across the frontier of the empire. Let's just write down what we have seen and let other scholars study and talk about it. If we can't risk such a journey. Who knows if we'd ever make it there and back again? Scholars talk, they don't walk." "No," said the third scholar, holding the scroll. "We can't just sit here and talk about it. The obedience of the nations is his. If this is the king, we must obey. We must go. We must organize a caravan and gather gifts fitting for such a king. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. We must risk the journey. We must go where the star leads us. We must worship the one-born King of the Jews, no matter what the risk." The three scholars turned expectantly to the fourth, who still has his doubts. Will they go? Will they risk the journey? Will you? Will I?
Well done. So, then they all wander off into the east. Huh. Good job, you guys. That was awesome. Let's give it up for our Magi and our star. So James ended that with a question. He said, will they risk the journey? Will you, will I? That's the question before us. And I think in a season where we've been conditioned to retreat. There's so much going on that's just in upheaval and creating all of this, this propensity to make us pull back and maybe not risk. I think it's very intentional that this year we would embrace Advent through the lenses of risk and renewing our capacity to do that. We're going to be doing that over the course of these next 4 weeks and examining what could keep us from risking and what's the opportunity to do that. So our theme for this 2020 Advent, the gift of risk, is looking at the whole Christmas story, the gospel story through the lenses of risk. For us in the Vineyard, this traces back to a phrase often repeated by the founder of the Vineyard movement, John Wimber. John used to remind us that faith is spelled R-E-S-K. Meaning that we may say that we have faith, but it's not until the moment that we have to put that faith on the line with real actions of trust and belief in God's willingness and in his capacity to come through, that we see what kind of faith we actually have growing within our soul. The characters in the Christmas story chose to put their faith into action that required them to embrace risk. Risking reputation and public perception, risking their anticipated future, their own plan for their lives, risking their resources, giving of themselves, their time, their finances to something bigger than themselves, something greater than their own comforts and security, risking whether God could and would deliver on the promises he had made them. Risk involves stepping into what we cannot control while acting on what we can control. We don't generally have control over the opportunities that life brings us to step out in faith-filled risk. We do, however, control over whether we say yes to that risk. Just consider the characters of that first Christmas, and we're going to be doing this over the course of the next few weeks. Mary was presented with an invitation that she did not initiate and that she could not bring about. But she could entrust herself to the one she knew to be good and capable. Joseph was presented with a situation that he did not ask for and that he could not undo. But he could give himself to Mary and her child that was not his own. The Magi that were in our story this morning, they were presented with an event supposedly happening in a distant land, in a foreign country. But they could begin the journey to see it and to participate. They could hit the pause button on everything else in their lives to embark upon a 1,500-mile adventure on foot, just so they could witness, so they could worship. As we move toward Christmas, we'll be considering faith-filled risk that's stepped out into by each of these main characters. Along the way, we'll be considering the characters of Hebrews 11. That's the great hall of faith, is what it's often called in church world. It's a listing of all of these people who longed for God to see God's promises in their day, and they lived lives of faith-filled risk while they waited to see that come about. Each day, our Green Pasture devotions will highlight one of those characters' lives, looking at some of the questions. What did it look like for them to step out in faith-filled risk in their time? What was their experience? How were they understood by their culture? How did they understand themselves? Where did they fall short? Where did they succeed? And the point of this is to nurture and to cultivate our own faith, our own willingness to step into the opportunities that God brings us to a daily life of faith-filled risk, to give ourselves to him and then to act on what we know to be true of his nature, what we know to be true of his ways, his intentions, to trust his Spirit to both lead us and to empower us to join his mission of redemption that was launched that first Christmas. And so today I want to begin not by looking back, but by looking up. Looking up to consider that the God who invites us into a life of faith-filled risk is himself a risk-taking God. Genesis 1 tells us the story of creation, of an immensely creative and powerful God who made everything out of nothing. The God who simply spoke everything into existence with the words, "Let there be," and it was so. The God who brought order into the chaos and the disorder of a formless creation. Genesis narrates this creative masterpiece in all of its immense beauty and mind-boggling diversity. Let there be light, sky, oceans, seas, rivers, waterfalls, rain, snow, continents, islands, mountains, canyons, plants, trees, flowers, shrubbery. Fruit of every kind, vegetables of every kind, sun, moon, stars, fish, birds, living creatures of every kind. He imagined, and then he created every feature of what is nothing less than the greatest masterpiece of all time. And then we are told with this masterpiece that God risked. As the very pinnacle of his creation, he made mankind, and he took the risk to entrust the rest of his wonderful masterpiece to our care. Everything he had just imagined and designed, everything he had spoken and shaped, he gave to us to steward, to use, to govern all of creation as we saw fit. And God risked when he also entrusted not only his creation to mankind, but his very image, his likeness. He entrusted us to be image bearers within creation, his representatives, capable of choosing to live in ways that either display and reflect him to one another, or to live and behave in ways that misrepresent and distort him. God risked further when he gave mankind a free will, the freedom to receive his love or reject it, the freedom to trust him or to fear him, the freedom to represent him or to distort him, the freedom to obey and the freedom to rebel, the freedom to lean in or to run away. And when we used our freedom to reject, to fear, to distort, to rebel, God risked to make a promise. He promised to fix what we had broken. He promised to give back what we had thrown away. He promised to restore what we had lost. He promised to renew and to remake his wonderful masterpiece. And so on that first Christmas, God also risked to enter his creation, to enter into his creation himself, not as a conquering king, not as a heavenly hero, but as a helpless newborn, a vulnerable infant entrusted to a teenage peasant and her fiance, a teenage girl living under the tyranny of the Roman Empire. This is indeed a risk-taking God. Over the next 4 weeks, we'll be considering the lives of people of faith who have gone before us, people who chose faith-filled risk in their day, in the midst of their difficult and uncontrollable circumstances. We'll learn from their successes and from their shortcomings. We'll watch them do what they can do while they wait in hope. While they wait in hope for God to do what only he can do. We will witness each of them reflecting the image of our risk-taking Creator through their own opportunities to choose faith-filled risk. And each day we'll be given the same opportunity. The opportunity to join our risk-taking God in the furthering of his mission to restore, renew, rescue, redeem. We'll be given the opportunity to let their stories awaken hope and faithfulness for our own stories, to let their lives inspire steadfastness and faithfulness and confidence that God will see to completion the promise that he unveiled that first Christmas. We'll see that we can live our lives as restored image bearers while we wait in hope. So this is an invitation. It's an invitation to spend the next 4 weeks daily cultivating faith. By looking at the stories of those who've gone before us, by looking at these stories that fill every page of Scripture, they're imperfect stories of imperfect people but who entrust themselves to a perfect God. When we read about their stories in Hebrews 11, they're very generous stories. We read about the stories in the Old Testament where they're really honest about what exactly happened. And then we read about it in Hebrews 11, and it almost seems like a whitewashed story. But God, through the lenses of faith and through the lenses of what Jesus has done, looks at these people and says, these are heroes of faith. These are people who stepped out in faith-filled risk. Today, before we close, I want to take a moment to share with you the story of a more modern-day saint. We use the language around here, saints, not in the sense of people with glowing halos around their head, but in the sense of people who are, in fact, new creations, people who have been chosen by God, who have responded to his invitation to new life, to spiritual rebirth, to new life, and that because of that, they're called to grow in that new image and to reflect God to the world. That's why Paul, in writing letters to all the New Testament churches, addresses those churches as saints. Today we read the story of a modern-day saint, one who chose a life of faith-filled love and risk during the difficult and uncontrollable circumstances of his life. Allow me to share with you the story of Mr. Bill. Bill spent his working years as a contractor, navigating the unsurprising ups and downs of the construction industry, years undoubtedly filled with high highs and low lows. But at last it was time to retire. And Bill had set himself up to spend his sunset years in relaxation and recreation, specifically fishing and golfing. And all of that was good and fine until his plans for leisure were interrupted by an opportunity to love and to serve others through a unique passion that God had given him: gardening. Bill had volunteered to help with the healthy but relatively small garden at his church, Vineyard Boise. And as he got his hands in the soil, his heart began getting vision for building again. But this time, something more organic. Instead of concrete, steel, and wood, he would this time build using soil, seeds, and people. Bill saw the undeveloped acres next to the Vineyard Food Pantry as an opportunity to grow vast quantities of fresh and healthy produce that could be given to the clients coming for help from Vineyard's Food Pantry. It would be a practical way to reflect God's image, to share God's love. And he saw the other gardeners in the church as a spiritual family who could join the mission. To quote Bill himself from an interview with CBN back in 2008, "I used to fly fish, I used to play golf, used to think I was doing everything right, but I found out to really get that hole in one, you need to be out here giving away these vegetables and helping the Lord," Bill said. And if we can see someone who's really benefiting from it, that makes it better than a hole in one. Unfortunately, Mr. Bill, as he came to be known, was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and before long began to experience the limitations and the tremors that made him question how much longer he could continue in the garden. Encouraged by his team and by his vineyard pastors, however, he kept giving just one more year. I'll pause in my reading here and say this. I remember our executive pastor, Tim, telling me one day, he said, Bill tries to quit every fall. And every fall I tell him, Bill, you can't quit. You got to give one more year. You got to train up other people, and you built this big thing. Because here's the thing with Bill, Mr. Bill, as we like to call him. Mr. Bill would never ask for permission to expand the garden. We would just find that the fence line had been moved. He literally lived by a policy: don't ask, don't tell. And it's easier to apologize than to ask in the first place. And so every year the garden would get bigger, and it grew to where it was an operation that required full-time oversight. Now, Bill, he oversaw it full-time. He literally lived down here with his little dogs. In fact, in one of those pictures, can you go back to the first set of pictures? See on the left one, you see that little white head at the bottom? That's one of his poodles. The dogs were always with him. He would live in his van, not down by the river, down by the garden. He had a Volkswagen van. He would live down here most of the gardening season, and he was here much more than full-time. Pastor Tim, he told me, he's like, look, the reason that I don't let him quit isn't just because we need him. He said, we do need him. We can't do what we do in that garden without him doing what he does. But he said that garden's keeping him alive. The garden's keeping his Parkinson's in check. Encouraged by his team and his vineyard pastors, he just kept giving one more year. To quote our founding pastor, Pastor Try, Bill Meeker is becoming a legend in his own time. He's an example of a man who caught a vision to serve the Lord in a way that fit his gifting and is using his retirement years to see it come to pass. He's a loved man that loves people. And because of it, he lets everyone have a part to play. His volunteer workers love him, and they love working for him. Bill's suffering with the beginning stages of Parkinson's disease, but that hasn't allowed it to slow him down. He's the kind of leader that gets his hands dirty along with everyone else, and he's a wonderful blessing to us all. Mr. Bill continued to lead and to serve. In what became known as Vineyard Boise's Garden of Feden. I don't know who came up with that. It may have been Mr. Bill. Garden of Feden, not Eden, Feden. Bill continued to lead and to serve in what became known as Vineyard Boise's Garden of Feden through many seasons and many years while battling Parkinson's disease. When he finally retired from the garden, it was ordered to spend more time, his remaining time, with his family in Oregon. So he moved away. That was short-lived, though, because his heart longed to be back in Boise. His home on this side of eternity was the Garden of Feden, and he knew that we needed his help and his oversight. For a man with advancing Parkinson's, it was a risk to keep gardening. But for Mr. Bill, there was a bigger risk in stopping. Mr. Bill passed away Thursday morning in the COVID wing of a care facility in Nampa. In the words of one of his hospice chaplains, who's also one of our two Vineyard Boise alumni pastors who happened to be his hospice chaplains. This is in the words of Ranger Bud. He's in the great garden now. Circle back to Christmas. Big picture. What does this all mean? What does it mean to look at Christmas through the lens of faith-filled risk? Christmas, that first Christmas, is the down payment. It's the first installment on that promise that God made back in the garden, back in Genesis 3. Which means that our lives today are characterized by two seemingly contradictory experiences. We experience in ourselves and in the world around us the brokenness of the sin and death unleashed by our first parents. And we also experience the restoration of God's love and his new life breaking through to us and then also through us. All of which was inaugurated through Jesus' birth, his life, and his eventual death on the cross. We experience God's love transforming our hearts, inviting us to join him as his spiritual family on mission to all of creation. And so we wait. Christmas reminds us that as we wait, as we long, as we grieve, we also hope. And we endure, and we trust, and we risk. Pastor Jesse's going to lead us in a closing worship carol. This is a time of year when we dig out those songs, the Christmas carols, and specifically in our context as saints, we lean into the ones that proclaim the story, the worship carols that fill our hearts with hope, that give voice to our longings, that remind us of the story, that we're anchored in a story that's bigger than the things going on, bigger than elections, bigger than pandemics, bigger than quarantines, bigger than economies. There's a cosmic story that we're a part of. We're called to live in faith-filled risk while we wait for the completion of that story. So would you join me if you're here on campus? We're going to dim the lights a little bit and invite you to stand. If you're at home, just encourage you to engage in this moment. It's not a moment to be a spectator. It's a moment to participate. It's a moment to let the words of this song become a prayer, to express both our longing and our hope as we live in the now and the not yet. Let's choose to worship. Let's choose to worship now so that when we scatter to love. That's our rhythms. We gather, we scatter. We come on campus, but it's not about what happens here, it's about what happens when we leave. So let's join the worship team in singing this prayer. And as we do so, let's offer ourselves. Let's offer ourselves that God, if you show us what my life of faith-filled risk looks like, what are the risks you want me to take? Where do you want me to step out? Where do you want me to keep stepping out? As a way of proclaiming and living in that first Christmas.
shall come to thee always right.
Jesus, we thank you that we have that first installment, that down payment of the promise that you are in fact making all things new, that you are redeeming and rescuing and renewing your broken creation. As we live in between your first and second coming, may we live with hope-filled lives, with faith-filled risk, to engage in your mission to see all of creation redeemed, to proclaim your message to our neighbors, to our coworkers, to our friends, to seize the opportunities to show your love, to plant seeds of the gospel, to pray for others, to invite your kingdom into their circumstances, to invite your healing into this hurting world. And so would you open our eyes this week? Would you touch us? Would you open our spiritual eyes, open our spiritual heart to see the opportunities around us every day, to be ambassadors of your love, to be agents of your love, to carry your image, just as you entrusted us at the beginning of creation. Lord, would you help us to experience Christmas fresh this year? To give ourselves to you and to give ourselves to the world as you did. In Jesus' name, amen. If you're online this morning and you'd like prayer, I encourage you to step out, take the risk to say, hey, I need prayer. Allow some of your brothers and sisters to pray with you and for you. There's that line or that email address if you want to send your prayer in that way. And if you're here in the room this morning and you'd like prayer, just invite you to raise your hand wherever you are. We want you to go out from here filled with faith, with God's touch. And so we've got some hands up around here. If somebody's got their hands up, would you just move around the room? Just place your hand on somebody's shoulder. I'd ask you to put your face covering on first. I want to keep everybody safe and healthy in this season. But we see some hands. We've got a hand over here. And a hand over here. And let's just take a few moments to pray over each other, to invite God's kingdom. And then let's go out from here and let's go with the intention and with the capacity to make the invisible God visible. Merry Christmas, Vineyard Boise.
Thanks for watching. To respond or receive prayer after the live stream closes, please email prayer@vineyardboise.org, and if possible, include your phone number. We'd love to get in touch with you. Thanks.